to another of our ongoing meeting in progress. You heard it here first. Waiting. Welcome to another installment of our ongoing Industry Insider Series. I'm Shannon, got Luke, and Claire is making everything happen. And today we have really excited to have a special guest, David Jennings.
Howdy.
Thank you, David. We are going to go through some Wild Turkey. The impetus for this particular episode is that we got a barrel selection of the Russell's Reserve, a single barrel bourbon that we did through the Bull City Bourbon Club, BC. Yep. We're very excited about it. But we're going to taste through. So just in case you have the booze on hand, we're going to taste through Wild Turkey 101 bourbon. We're going to taste through the aforementioned Russell's Reserve single barrel pick. And then for S&Gs, a little rare breed because we have it. And it's delicious. So we're super excited to have David Jennings, who literally wrote, if not at least a book on Wild Turkey that I am a huge fan of, called American Spirit. Dave, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. And that is the only Wild Turkey bourbon book that I know of. But there are plenty of bourbon books out there that talk about Wild Turkey. So
excellent. The book
for now
on Wild Turkey.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, I guess before we get too far along, I'd love you to just kind of tell us about how you got so into Wild Turkey that you wrote a book based on one brand.
Okay. It's actually a pretty simple story. I've enjoyed whiskey since my college days in the mid-90s. Although at that time it was typically like a Jim and Coke, or Jack and Coke, Crown and Coke, this type of thing. And that continued on for years. But around 2013, my brother-in-law, he asked if I wanted a drink, and I said, sure. And I was thinking I'd be getting like a Coke and Crown or something. And he gave me a glass of, it was a Crown Royal, like XR or something, one of the special editions. And it was on the rocks. And, I've had like straight whiskey as a shooter before, but I had never had it like as a beverage. And I enjoyed it. I mean, I really was, kind of surprised at how much I enjoyed it. So I decided I'm going to get into this. Like, this is going to become my thing. I'm going to go find the best damn whiskey in the world. So I went on this journey and I bought Canadian, Irish, Scotch, eventually reached bourbon, found something I really liked in bourbon, and started going to blogs, reading different books and magazines, going on to Reddit on the Our Bourbon subreddit, and started doing some reviews on Reddit. And one day, I was at the liquor store. I had been avoiding Wild Turkey because I remembered Wild Turkey from college as being, the wild man's drink. That was what you did shots with and woke up regretting it the next day. But I decided to pick up a small bottle of Wild Turkey at checkout to review for Reddit. Pretty sure that it wasn't going to be good. Like, this is, I'm doing this to take one for the team, right? Get home, pour me a glass, and damn if it wasn't like a really good whiskey. And I was like, wow, does everybody feel this way about Wild Turkey? I'm like, am I going to start getting picked on when I start talking about how good Wild Turkey 101 is, So I'm on Reddit talking about Wild Turkey 101 one day, because by this point I had bought it a few times. And someone asked me if I had tried Dusty Turkey. And I said, well, no. I'd had Wild Turkey shots in college, or whatever, but I'd never sat down and sipped, an older Wild Turkey expression. And he sent me a sample of a 1981 101 and a 1992 Cheesy Goldfold, which is a 12-year expression that they no longer make, but it's coming back, by the way. We can talk about it later. Yeah. We can talk about that later. When I nosed that 1981 101, I was hooked. I was like, this is everything I want in a bourbon. Like, this is just amazing. Went to the 12-year, same type of thing. So I went on this quest to try to find that profile, and I started burning through the Wild Turkey catalog. I bought, all the Russell's line. I tried the Rise, the special editions like Diamond and 17 and everything that was out at the time. And I couldn't find an expression to match the Dusty bourbon. And really, you're not going to find any modern whiskey of any brand that's going to match their Dusty counterpart. It just doesn't exist. So people that think that today's Weller tastes like yesterday's Weller, they're wrong. It doesn't, so it's not just Turkey that has this type of, divide, but I was just trying to find that profile. What I did find, I didn't find that Dusty profile in the modern releases, but I found profiles that I loved anyway. Like, it was just like they were different flavors. It was like they were all good flavors. They weren't the Dusty. But I did get into, acquiring some Dusty bottles, and they were a lot more reasonably priced back then than they are now. It's just ridiculous how much they charge now. But you could find like a cheesy gold foil for $250. And now I'm, you're probably over 1,000 or something now in the secondary. It's insane. But I started writing reviews of these Wild Turkey expressions for Reddit. And at some point in time, I thought, well, I should probably catalog these somewhere because I'm doing a lot of Wild Turkey. And I put them on a blog that was private almost exactly 5 years ago. So November 30th of 2016, I started Rearbird 101. And it was private for a couple months. And I reached, 20, 30 something reviews, and I flipped the switch and made it public. And slowly but surely, people started checking it out. And in 2017, a writer by the name of Aaron Goldfarb, who has published a couple whiskey books and writes for GQ and Whiskey Advocate and several other online magazines, he reached out to me. He was doing a piece about Wild Turkey, and he had found the blog, and he had a lot of questions for me. And one thing led to another. That article caused some traffic. I ended up talking to some folks at Campari PR, and next thing you know, the blog had kind of taken off, and I got on Instagram. I didn't get on Twitter immediately. That came later, but started getting some attention there. All the while, I'm thinking Wild Turkey still isn't a very popular bourbon. I mean, even in 2016, 2017, it wasn't what everybody was chasing. Everybody was chasing the Buffalo Trace stuff, and the harder to find Michter's, and they still are. But now people are chasing Wild Turkey, but at this time they weren't. So it was amazing to see this attention given to a brand that had for so long really only been popular among a very small demographic, because bourbon enthusiasts that have been around a long time that knew Wild Turkey, they loved Wild Turkey. But a lot of the folks new to the game, it wasn't even on their radar. They were entering it with the same, expectation I was, that this was like, roughneck whiskey. And they were so wrong. I was doing all these blog posts for these years, and my wife one day said, you really ought to just write a book. And I thought, you're right. Like, I am not an author, but she convinced me to just at least try. So one night I sat down and I just started typing. Normally with a book, they say you should write the introduction last. Well, I wrote my introduction first. I'm like, I'm just going to sit down and tell people who I am and why I'm writing this book. And the introduction that's in that book beside you today is the same introduction I wrote, that day back in, that must have been late 2018, mid to late 2018. Same thing. So then, as I'm writing this book, I feel like I'm not just telling a history book. I'm kind of taking people through my journey. So, this is my journey into Wild Turkey that I'm going to share with you, and we're going to go through the history. We're going to go through the expressions. We're going to go through some of the specs and the details, but not get too nerdy with it. I started a Kickstarter, and it was successfully funded. That allowed me to hire Victor Sizemore to take photographs for that book, American Spirit, and signed on with a publisher, Mascot Books in Virginia. And next thing you know, it was out in 2020, just in time for COVID. And it was supposed to be a hardback book and all this kind of stuff. And because of COVID, I ended up going with the domestic printer, and it was, paperback. But hey, it got out there when it needed to get out there. And if anyone's interested in the book, again, it's American Spirit. You can find it at wildturkeybook.com or Amazon or wherever you want to go. But fast forward to today, and I'm still writing about wild turkey. People are like, "Are you ever going to get sick about writing about wild turkey?" And honestly, the answer is no. I mean, I'm a huge fan. I am not a wild turkey expert. Eddie and Jimmy Russell are wild turkey experts. I am a wild turkey fan. I'm not a bourbon expert. I'm a bourbon enthusiast. I've got a lot more to learn. I think we all do. We're always learning. But I enjoy what I do, and Wild Turkey keeps making stellar whiskey. And as long as they keep making good whiskey, I'm going to keep writing about it. So that's kind of where I am today and how I got here.
Okay. Thank you for that. That was really, really helpful. It really shows people how you came to it, which is nice, because you came to it as, this is something I love.
Right.
You know, and that it's nice that you were able to keep building it. But when you read the book, it's clear that this is something you love.
Oh, definitely.
Which I happen to share your love of it. I think I woke my wife up one time I'm reading the book. I'm like, yeah.
Awesome.
I don't know that it's supposed to be like a play-by-play like that, but I was into it. At any rate, let's talk about the 101. Let's start walking through these so people can sniff and nose and taste along.
Okay, I noticed you've got the previous bottle. This is the newest bottle. Is kind of see if I can get here. It's this new embossed glass.
Mm-hmm.
Looks beautiful when it's full. When it's empty, it kind of the bird looks sad. But that just tells you that you need to get more turkey. That's your cue. But anyway, so Wild Turkey 101. This is the expression that started it all. And to give everyone a very brief history without getting too much into details, I think it's important for everyone to know that Wild Turkey, even though the bottle says 1855, that is not really the exact year that Wild Turkey started. So you have to understand that there's a history of the distillery, there's a history of the brand, and then there's a history of the merging of the two, because there really are some delineations here that need to be made. So in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, the distillery that's now Wild Turkey used to be the Rippey Brothers Distillery. And even back before then, it was the Old Moore Distillery. And that area of Kentucky was a real hot spot for bourbon in the 1800s, mid to late 1800s. You had Cedar Brook with Judge McBrayer and all this type of stuff going around over there. Saffel, Bon and Lillard. There's a lot of distilleries that were operating in that late 1800s period, early 1900s before Prohibition. But I'll just briefly mention the Rippey family. James Rippey came to the United States in the mid 1800s, early to mid 1800s, and came from Ireland, Tyrone, Ireland, settled in Anderson County, Kentucky, and named the area where he lived Tyrone, which is where Wild Turkey is today, and would become Lawrenceburg. But James Rippey had two sons, James P. Rippey and T.B. Rippey. T.B. Rippey became pretty much the biggest distiller at one point in time. He balled up distilleries. He would buy them, then flip them and sell them, and he would hold on to one or two. And he was kind of a wheeler dealer guy. But his brother James P. Rippey bought the Old Moore Distillery, which is where Wild Turkey is at now. And he produced several different bourbons there in the late 1800s. When T.B. Rippey died, his sons purchased that distillery from J.P. Rippey and made it Rippey Brothers. And Rippey Brothers operated until Prohibition, when it had to close down. When it opened back up as Rippey Brothers, and changed ownership sometime around 1950, when the Gould brothers purchased the distillery. They renamed it Anderson County Distillery. And then in 1954, a young man named Jimmy Russell was hired at that Anderson County Distillery. In 55, it changed its name to JTS Brown. Now, pause right there. If you go to New York, specifically Brooklyn, in the late 1800s, there was a grocer there that was becoming the largest grocery distributor in the country, and that was Austin Nichols. And Austin Nichols has a very detailed history that you can learn in the book, but it basically, to give you the short of it, they decided at the turn of the century, when they kind of saw what was coming, they kind of saw that, five and dimes were going to be the big thing. And the mom and pop, grocery system that had been there for so long, where, these grocery stores that didn't matter, who you were, you bought from like a few distributors. And, this is before the days of grocery chains. When Woolworths and these five and dimes came along in New York, they kind of saw they probably needed to diversify a little bit, because the old way of doing things is not really working. So they went into wine and spirits. So Austin Nichols and Company, this grocery distributor, went into spirits. And after Prohibition, they had several successful whiskeys, rye whiskey from Maryland, and they had a Kentucky whiskey. They didn't call it bourbon, they called it Kentucky whiskey. They decided that they wanted to kind of reach another market and kind of really focus on whiskey and bourbon specifically. There was an executive there named Thomas McCarthy. Thomas McCarthy was an avid wild turkey hunter, and he used to like to hunt wild turkey in the Carolinas. Some say South Carolina, some say North Carolina. I usually say South Carolina because that's where I live, but because I'm doing this stream, we'll say North Carolina for you guys. How about that? And anyway, so Mr. McCarthy, he liked to take bourbon with him when he went hunting, and he also took his friends. Sometime in the late 1930s, 38, 39, somewhere around there, Mr. McCarthy had taken some bourbon that Austin Nichols owned. It was a 101 proof bourbon. Took it to this hunting trip, and his buddies loved it. So the next year, they were getting revved up for the trip, and his buddy said, "Hey, be sure to bring that, that wild turkey bourbon, that we had, the bourbon you brought on the turkey hunt." And he's like, "Bingo, light bulb, wild turkey bourbon. This is it. This is how we need to brand Austin Nichols Kentucky whiskey." So they took their their Austin Nichols Kentucky whiskey and turned it into Austin Nichols Wild Turkey 101 proof 8-year bourbon. That hit shelves in 1942. Well, Austin Nichols didn't own a distillery. They were much like a non-distiller producer is now. You basically sourced. They had a warehouse in Brooklyn. They would buy up barrels, and then they would get those barrels and bottle them. And one of the main sources was JTS Brown, or Anderson County prior to that, in Lawrenceburg there, and which is Wild Turkey now. So they got a lot of whiskey from there. They got whiskey from Old Boone. They got whiskey from, Old Joe. It just really wherever you could get it. But the majority of it was coming from Rippey Brothers, Anderson County, JTS Brown, that distillery there. Some years go by, it became a very popular bourbon. It was a favorite of President Truman. It was a favorite of John Wayne. These were folks that, really kind of helped put wild turkey on the map. So Austin Nichols decided that they should probably go ahead and just buy a distillery, because that way you can control the supply. They're not having to broker and this type of thing. So in 1971, Austin Nichols and Company purchased the Wild Turkey Distillery, and it basically was renamed Austin Nichols Distillery at that point. Jimmy Russell was master distiller, and here we are now. It's exchanged hands a few times. Pernod bought it in 1980, and then you had Campari buy it in 2009. But it's still that same distillery. I mean, it's got a new facility, but it's the same, distillery with the same distiller. Jimmy Russell is the master distiller, been the master distiller since 1967. He's the longest tenured master distiller of any spirit in the world right now.
So he's going to figure it out soon. He's going to get
Yeah,
it dialed in.
he's getting there. He's almost there, right?
He's almost there. Well,
But
I mean,
that's a
still at
basic.
it.
Yeah,
Like
he's still at
Eddie
it.
thought he was going to retire 20 years ago, didn't he?
Yeah, they did. They actually had a bottle ready to go. They thought that was going to be it. And as Eddie will joke with you, he's going to retire before Jimmy does. So, so back to I don't want to mean to get too far off, but back to the expression Wild Turkey 101. So this is Wild Turkey. Like this is the main expression, the flagship, as you might say, of the brand.
When you're smelling this, I mean, we happen to like it here at Alley 26. We sell a goodly amount of it on purpose. We try to sneak it into cocktails pretty much at any excuse because it's delicious. But
definitely.
When you're smelling this, what are the notes that maybe you can say that people can smell along to?
Okay, so this is essentially just core turkey here. You're going to get, on the nose, you're going to have a very nice vanilla. You're going to have that oak char, but it's a sweet oak char. It's not, it's not tannic or heavy. A lot of folks get toffee on the nose, and if you get kind of way in there, you'll get some citrus like orange peel, maybe some orange zest, lemon zest, and then some baking spice, or sometimes it can even be a little herbally. So really, you have that element. You have that kind of that sweet vanilla forward. You get that oak char, and then you get some citrus and spice. That's really 101 in a nutshell. And those same notes are going to transition when you taste it. You're going to get some of those very same notes. They're going to kind of swap up positions maybe a little bit. So like we're on the nose, you might have gotten a little bit more, vanilla. It might be a little bit darker on the palate, like might become more of a caramel kind of thing. The oak char might have a little bit more girth to it. And then the finish, you might get more of that spice that you was in the background on the nose. That finish is going to really kind of leave that spice lingering. It has a fairly long finish for a bourbon.
I've always loved that about Wild Turkey. The finish, the viscosity, how it's chewy, which I tend to like in whiskey. But also, you can tell me how you feel about this. I like how the nose is pretty much, I love your description of it, spot on. But then in the palate, that kind of red, kind of sour cherry develops.
Yeah.
Really love that fruit.
Yeah, there's like a lot of folks have a little way to describe it. Some people call it funk. It's not the kind of funkiness you get with like a dusty turkey. But Wild Turkey does have on the palate, there's this little hard to place kind of note that lets you know this is Wild Turkey. It is somewhat of a sour note, like a very mildly sour note, like a sour citrus or a sour cocktail cherry or something like that. But it's there. And some people kind of equate it to like like even some people use descriptors like hay and things like this. Everyone's kind of has a different interpretation, but the general gist of it is that there's this little note there with Wild Turkey that no other bourbon has, and it lets you know that this is Wild Turkey.
Well, yeah.
What do you think kind of lends to that? Is it more of the mash bill or more of the aging process, where like the level 4 char that they're using in the barrels? What do you think?
I think it's some of everything. It's like the yeast, number one. I mean, they have their own proprietary yeast. So, every distillery has their own yeast, or in some cases, multiple yeasts, like Four Roses. But Wild Turkey's yeast lends a signature flavor to every one of their expressions. Like you can taste the rye and you still taste that note, So I think the yeast has a lot to do with it. Of course, if you go on a tour at the distillery, they like to talk about it being, a high rye mash bill. It's not. When Jimmy was starting, it was high rye. A long time ago, distillers didn't use but maybe 5% rye or something, in their bourbons. It wasn't very common to do like a significant percentage of rye in your whiskey, or at least in bourbon. But as brands change, and flavor profiles kind of expand, 13% is not, it's really not that high compared to something like Four Roses.
Right.
But it's higher rye, so that lends to some of the flavor. But I think the greatest majority of Wild Turkey's flavor comes from the fact that they use a pretty heavy barrel char. They have a number 4 char, and they use traditional wood-clad rick houses to age their whiskey. They don't use heat-cycled warehouses. Nothing against that, but Old Forester, Woodford, they use heat-cycled warehouses. Wild Turkey just puts the barrels up and they just walk away. They let Mother Nature. So if it's cold as hell, the barrel's cold as hell. If it's hot as hell, the barrel's hot as hell. I mean, just like that's just the way it works. And you get that airflow in those rick houses, and it's depending on the elevation and the construction and how old it is. Each rick house imparts its own unique little profile tweaks to that core Wild Turkey, profile. So I think the majority of it is, there's really not one factor. It's kind of like you got to kind of acknowledge all these things. Plus, I should probably mention that Wild Turkey ages their whiskey fairly long. A lot of producers will bottle at 4 or 5 or 6 years, like Maker's Mark, and that's fine. That works for them, and I like Makers. But Wild Turkey doesn't bottle until about 6.5 years. So 101 is like 6.5 to 8 years typically. Sometimes there's some 10-year, 12-year barrels that go into those standard 101 just to reach the profile. You've got to like taste it. You got to, so whatever it takes to get it to that 101 profile, that's what they dump into it. So, there's a lot of things that add up to get that profile that Wild Turkey is.
Well, we could probably move on to the next whiskey.
Okay.
And continue with this similar line of chatting.
Okay. So this is you're calling this the
Back Alley Bird.
Back Alley Bird. Okay. This is Russell's Reserve Single Barrel. Russell's Reserve Single Barrel is, of course, a single barrel product. It's a bourbon. It is non-chill filtered. It is bottled always to date at 110 proof, which is pretty close to barrel proof because Wild Turkey has a 115 barrel entry proof. That means that the whiskey enters the barrel at 115 proof every time. And so you're going to end up with barrels that are typically between 110 and 120 proof. So 110 is pretty close to barrel proof, especially for barrels that sit around that 4th floor, middle of the rick house.
David,
yeah.
Quick question, because you just mentioned that they pull it off at 115, and instead of
they dump it into the barrel at 115.
They dump it at 115 instead of 125.
Right, into the barrel at 115. Mm-hmm.
And they're pulling off the still where?
Oh goodness,
like 135.
I'd have to look it up, but I mean, it's in my book. I just don't have it on the top of my head. I don't want to mislead anyone. That's
okay, but I also don't remember the number, and I read your book.
But you can't remember everything.
So what strikes me, or what struck me, was that they pull it off lower, they put it in the barrel even lower. And does that account for more of the mash showing through the final product? Like maybe it's not as high rye as Bullet or whatever is really high rye now. But because they're not distilling all the flavor off and they're not putting it in the barrel so hot, it's still, I can tell there's rye in this. You can taste that.
Yeah, when you add, from what I've tasted in my time in this hobby, having a good bit of water or what we would call lower barrel entry proof, tends to give you more flavor. Now, of course, it comes at the cost of not being able to bottle a very high proof spirit. So that was part of the reason why Wild Turkey changed. They used to have a 107 barrel entry proof all the way up until 2004. They briefly had a barrel entry proof of 110, and then it went to 115 in 2006. But it was hard to compete with other brands with expressions like Booker's, where it's like 120 plus Stag, these types of things. And when the highest that you can get is 108 for rare breed, like, and that's, like, maybe the highest rare breed was like 110, 112 before, they made the big change.
Now it's 116.8, is that right?
116.8 now, which is still, a respectable barrel proof, but there's a lot higher ones out there. Elijah Craig barrel proof will push 140 even and wants one over it. So, but proof isn't everything. And when you enter the barrel with a lower barrel entry proof, which 115 is still, pretty low by most standards. A lot of folks are doing 125 now, which is the maximum allowed by law. It just gives you more sweeter flavor. You don't pull as many tannic type of notes out of the oak, which, by the way, and you asked where it came off the still. I had to flip through. It comes off at about 130. So,
okay.
So from 130 to 115 into the barrel. But and then depending on the expression, it'll be bottled at whatever proof, for the expression. 101 for 101, 101 for Kentucky Spirit, and 90 for Russell's 10. There's a lot of different proof points for the different expressions.
David,
but
another thing you mentioned, really passing, I hate to keep stopping.
No, it's okay.
You said a little more water, a lower barrel entry proof also gives a sweeter bourbon, less tannic.
Yeah.
And one thing I like about Turkey is you don't get as much tannin on the nose.
Right. You get that oak char because they use that number 4 char, and it spends a good bit of time in the barrel, which, they're not dumping it at 4 years. They're dumping it at 6.5 to 8 for 101. So yeah, it has a sweeter, and you get the oak char. It's just not that bitter oak char. It's not like a walnut shell or something where it's dry and kind of abrasive. It's a very sweet, approachable. But for this Russell's Reserve, again, 110 proof, non-chill filtered. This is pretty much, almost like sipping it from the barrel, with the exception of some additional water here. But this particular barrel came from Tyrone F. Tyrone being the main campus of Wild Turkey. So this is the rickhouses that are situated around the actual distillery. Tyrone F, I don't know the age on it, but it's been there for quite a while. It's got some braces on the inside, kind of keeping it held up. So it's been there for a good long while.
Did you say this was probably going to be one of the last runs that they do?
Yeah, so Tyrone F isn't in the best health. So I don't know if you're going to be seeing single barrels from Tyrone F much longer. Because from what I've picked up is that, it's getting time to maybe start saying goodbye to Tyrone F. But
before it falls in.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta watch your inventory. You gotta watch your safety, and the last thing you need is a collapse. So rick houses, sometimes we have to say goodbye to them. So from what I've picked up and gathered, this one is kind of not in the it's not going to be around much longer, I don't think. It's probably easier just to build another one than it is to try to shore it up. And it doesn't really have the historical significance of something like, say, Rickhouse A, which has been there since 1894. So you gotta kind of figure out where the money needs to go, and a new Rickhouse would probably just be better off. Again, I should probably stress this for the folks watching. I don't work for Campari. I'm not an employee of Wild Turkey, and these are just things I pick up from being inside the industry and talking to folks. So don't take that as some type of official word, but yeah, that's what I'm getting from it. But
you weren't in on that meeting.
Yeah, no. But yeah, so this is Tyrone F, the 4th floor, which is in the middle of the rick house, which is kind of ideal for pulling single barrels. This is where you get that that nice interaction. Barrels on the top floor tend to age faster and get, a lot more heat and wood interaction. Barrels on the bottom floor age slower. So you want to try to find something in the middle if you're looking for a single barrel. If you're batching, you may want some from the top, you may want some from the bottom. But when you're looking for a single barrel, you're going to usually kind of shoot for the middle there.
So they call that the honey hole. Is that?
Yeah, well, it's the sweet spot, or you can have a honey floor or whatever, but it all depends on well, and there's different. I mean, some rick houses, the sixth floor produces wonderful single barrels. Other rick houses, the third floor produces. It all depends on elevation and airflow and various factors. But that's the thing about bourbon is people don't understand that this isn't something that its profiles are not easily replicated. It's like Mother Nature. I can see why distilleries like Woodford want heat cycled warehouses. They want to be able to control that consistency. But Wild Turkey has variance, but it's a quality variance. So the single barrels will taste different from one another. And the batches, even of the larger batch products like Rare Breed and Wild Turkey 101, will change in time. So if I pop the cork on a Rare Breed from 2010 and compared it to a Rare Breed from today, it is not going to taste the same. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But main reason is, it is a product of Mother Nature in many ways. So, and it, as you know from, cooking various meals, is that you can take the same recipe and make it, day after day after day. But, you change one little thing or one little, type of produce or spice or whatever, everything kind of plays a major role in the end process. So, that's why Wild Turkey is the way it is. A lot of it is Mother Nature, kind of having its impact. But going to this single barrel, if anybody sipping along has this particular barrel or a Tyrone F selection from this year, I can tell you that I really enjoyed this particular barrel. And the notes that I tasted earlier today and kind of composed some notes. So what I'm telling you here is not something I'm just coming up with off the fly, but what I'm getting on the nose is initially I get a nice caramel apple, or what I would call like a carnival type of note, where you get like that kind of autumn spice, candy apple, caramel apple, things that you would kind of associate with treats that sweet treats you might get, at the fair. Okay. And that transitions to like a kind of like a vanilla cream cheese pastry type of note. And then from there, I got some citrus and some faint cinnamon, and that was on the nose. Just a really nice complexity, but still with that nice Wild Turkey core profile. But moving on to the taste of it, initially there's like a lot of toffee for me, like maybe like a English toffee, like a little darker toffee. I also got some oak char, some pepper, some salted caramel, and then on the back palate, some licorice and maybe like a little bit of sassafras. It has like a little bit of a darker kind of spice on the back palate.
I'm getting a good amount of cocoa as well.
Mm-hmm. I could see that. The finish, it's not as long to me as 101. I think you get a lot of the flavor more early on. The spice lingers a good bit, but I would call it what I call like a medium long finish. And the notes that I tasted earlier today, and I'm getting right now as well, is I'm getting a lot of that oak char on the finish. It's a sweet oak char. It's not a dry, tannic, bitter kind of oak.
Astringent.
Right. It's not astringent at all. Some vanilla bean. I get a little toasted maple. Some smoky orange peel. It's almost like when someone were to take an orange and they take like a torch lighter to the peel.
Blue-laid orange.
Yeah, I'm getting a little bit of that. And then, of course, you get a little baking spice finish there where it kind of finishes out with that tingly kind of baking, a little bit of clove or something, cinnamon clove type of thing. Excellent barrel. Really enjoyed it. For anybody curious, if you can't find this particular barrel, Tyrone 4 or the fourth floor Tyrone produced a lot of single barrels this year. So if you do a little bit of hunting, searching, maybe you got some friends out of state, it shouldn't be too difficult to find a Tyrone F4 barrel this year.
And you could find that out because if you don't live in North Carolina and buy your booze through ABC, there wouldn't be that stamp there covering it.
Yeah,
But it's right underneath that stamp.
the fourth floor, right? Yeah.
Fourth floor. It says F. You just can't read 4.
Right.
So, well, it's an improvement. They used to aim for any kind of age statement on the front label. Anything that would differentiate it from another product in the same line. But now they've saw fit to help us out and just
information on the back.
cover information
Yeah.
on the back. But at least customers can read the bottles now. That's
Yeah,
nice.
there you go.
So 2 things. A, because we're doing this and people get to hear what you're saying about it, we're doing this as our Whiskey Wednesday offering again tomorrow, which means we're offering at cost pour $6 pours of this single barrel
Wow.
delicious bourbon.
Well worth it. Yeah, definitely check it out. If anything too, it's with Wild Turkey, they have such a wide number of rickhouses. And I think that you should never just make up your mind about Wild Turkey based on a single barrel offering. You really need to taste the different rickhouses from different years because they're very different sometimes. And so if you want an example of what Tyrone F4 in 2021 tastes like, here's your opportunity. Get down there tomorrow and give it a taste.
Well, oh, sorry.
I was just wondering, since Tyrone is probably going to end up not being used for much longer.
Well, there's Tyrone F, right?
Tyrone,
F.
yeah, my fault.
Yep.
For consistency purposes, say that if that were to be tore down when it is done, would they build another rick house in the same location to try and get a similar consistent product?
Good question. I don't know. Well, a lot of ifs. Again, all this is speculation, but from what I gather, that's inevitable. Whether it's this year, next year, a couple of years.
It doesn't seem like anybody wants less rick houses at this point.
Right. You would want to replace it, especially Wild Turkey is ramping up in production. It's no secret. There was a behind the barrel a couple weeks ago, and Eddie talked about it. So they're ramping up production across the board for their standard expressions and their single barrel offerings as well. So, you can't have more bourbon until you have more barrels, and more barrels equals more rick houses. So yes.
Right.
So two questions. A, and I guess this is more of a statement. When I first heard of the idea of single barrels, I thought, how cool is that? Because they usually mingle bourbons together. And so they get this consistent product. But how cool would it be to taste kind of outliers or best in class examples and their kind of interesting uniqueness? So the idea of trying to get an extremely consistent single barrel seems self-defeating.
Right. Yeah. I mean, at best, you might say, like Kentucky Spirit, for example, which is their single barrel offering that's at 101 proof. The whole point of Kentucky Spirit really is to kind of give you what Eddie likes to call 101 in a tuxedo. Mm-hmm. So you're going to get that 101 profile, but it's going to have a level of elegance to it with nuances and complexities that you're not going to typically find in 101, because 101 has that 6.5 year element to it. But Kentucky Spirit is at least 8 years old, but I've seen them as high as 13 years. So 101 is something that's supposed to be a little bit more turkey, right? Kind of like that core turkey, that Jimmy profile, as people like to say. Whereas Russell's Reserve Single Barrel tends to kind of show off a little bit, to kind of say, well, I'm Wild Turkey, but I'm a little bit of a curveball, So if you're looking for more of a core turkey experience with a single barrel twist, go Kentucky Spirit. If you want to go something kind of potentially out there, play around with Russell's Reserve single barrel and try different rick houses, and you're gonna find all kinds of different profiles.
So before we move on to the rare breed, I just wanted to say something that I really enjoyed about your book.
Oh, thank you.
And these are unsolicited compliments he's getting here. Is in the second section, after the history, he moves on. I don't know why I'm going to hold his book up to the camera. He moves on to descriptions, but each description is like what the thing is, age proof, tasting notes, and just kind of this is what it is. But then after that, we talked about this a little earlier, you do a section called author's impression,
Right.
which the first couple of products I went through, I was like, wasn't the first thing the author's impression? But then I got, it was a little more like the first bit is more like, this is really what is.
Right.
And the second bit is, I acknowledge my own prejudice and this is how I feel about it.
Yeah. So so there's the book is essentially divided into two sections. You have the history and you have the expressions. So it's like part, history, part appreciation. But in the expression section, I set out to define essentially what each expression is, what makes it an expression of its own. And then I give you my impression of it. Most of the time, it's a favorable impression.
Yeah.
But there's a few in there where, I'm like, hey, try harder.
No, I love that.
Work,
I love that because
Wild Turkey might not love that, but I had to be honest,
Well, I think at the end of the day, they have to like it because at the end of the day, even when you're like, I wish the regular Russell's Reserve was higher proof or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's coming from the viewpoint of somebody who's acknowledged that he's a fanboy. You're saying you love it. I've read multiple reviews of their 101 expression that are glowing that I 100% agree with. So they got to, it's like love from a family member.
You have to be honest, and it's just an opinion too. So because I feel, and I made sure to stress that with the author's impression, I didn't want to leave it like, and I'm not naming any names, but there are some whiskey books where they basically set out to tell you, this whiskey isn't good, or this whiskey, we say, therefore it is. And I wanted to make sure that folks understand that this is just my interpretation of that. And what's interesting too, on top of that, is looking back, because I'm getting together as soon as I finish my second book. The next project I'll be doing is a second edition of American Spirit. And one thing that I've thought about is some of my opinions have changed. So I'm going to have to kind of address that in my next book, not just, I can't just change it. I have to explain why, because I can't just turn coat and mysteriously think a different way without kind of explaining to people why. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. And I think we as bourbon enthusiasts need to be honest with ourselves and understand that, it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to not like something as much and then like it more, a year or two later. Your palates change, your moods change, the more whiskeys that you taste tend to kind of change the whiskeys that you like now. So anyway, long story short is it's just an opinion, and opinions are always free to change.
Very nice. I did see at the very back, you have some recipes, but I didn't see Jimmy's recipe for the mint julep.
I actually thought about printing, but I'm like, that's just you almost have to watch Jimmy do that one. Like,
yeah, that's true.
It doesn't translate to paper very well. And I'll tell y'all now, it's on YouTube and it's on the official Wild Turkey YouTube channel. Just do a search, Jimmy Russell mint julep recipe. I'm not spoiling anything. Luke knows what I'm talking about. Just watch it. It's you have to. His recipe.
It's a good story.
Yeah, it's a good story, and it's the best recipe probably.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Rare breed?
Rare breed.
I don't think you're gonna like this one as much. You want to?
I'll drink it for you if you're gonna have problems tasting it.
So, okay, Rare Breed, just a little background. Rare Breed was first released in 1991, and it was Wild Turkey's answer to Booker's, basically, because Booker Doe created the first mass-produced, barrel-proof small batch bourbon. I mean, he basically kind of marketed the whole small batch thing. But Booker's was a 6 to 8 year, full strength Jim Beam, still around. Well,
Still delicious.
it's still delicious, inexpensive, but good. So in 91, Jimmy decided he was going to he likes his bourbon at 8 years. Okay. But to make it Rare Breed, it has to kind of have its own kind of signature kind of touch to it. So it's centered around that 8-year profile, but Jimmy added 12-year whiskey to give it some maturity. And then he added some 6-year whiskey to give it some zest, some youthful kick, So Rare Breed is a combination of 6, 8, and 12-year straight bourbons. And they're bottled at barrel proof. They are chill filtered, which is something that hopefully Campari will address in the future. I don't understand why it's chill filtered, but for the folks watching, wondering what chill filtering is, it's just a cosmetic process. You essentially freeze the whiskey to filter out fatty acids and try to make it look prettier. There is a non-chill filtered Rare Breed. This is it, but you can only find it duty free. Travel retail.
And that was just released, correct?
Yeah, 2019, but I mean, I don't think you really saw it hitting like shelves till 2020 in those duty frees. But you can find it online. Must Have Malts has them pretty frequently, and you'll pay a little bit of a premium for them. But I'll have a review published on my blog soon. I talked to my Patreon folks about it, but there really isn't that much difference between it and Rare Breed. Don't go spending a fortune on it. The Rare Breed that's at the store is in a blind. The only way you guess it is the NCF one's a little darker and it has a little bit richer of a mouthfeel, but other than that, it's pretty much Rare Breed. So in 91, they came out with Rare Breed, and for many years, it was a new batch every year. So each year would see a new batch of Rare Breed. That changed around 99. In 99, they had a batch that ran until 2004. And then in 2004, they had a batch that ran until around 2013. And then in 2014, you had the 112.8. And now you've got the 116.8, which came out around 2016 or so. And it's still the 116.8. But it's a batch of 6, 8, and 12-year bourbons. Barrel strength. It is chill filtered, but it's a lovely, lovely whiskey, and it's only about $45-$50 depending on where you live. So
55 for us.
Okay.
55, 60.
Yeah, so just north of 50 for the customer here.
Okay, but with Rare Breed, okay, you're going to get a profile that's kind of like Wild Turkey 101 to 11. You know what I mean? Like the amp is cranked to 11. So, every note that you would get in 101 is just going to be stronger. So it's your vanillas are going to be richer. The baking spice is going to be spicier. The oak char is going to be more prevalent. Still a sweet oak char, but it's going to be more prevalent. Your caramel is going to be darker with more of a toasted quality to it. You're going to be able to pull out more individual spice notes, where something like 101, you're like, yeah, this is baking spice. It has a nice kind of baked spice. You're going to be able to say, okay, there is definitely cinnamon, clove, sassafras, like cola. You're going to be able to pick up a lot more complexity in Rare Breed. Of course, it comes at the cost of a higher proof. So for people that don't enjoy a high proof whiskey, understand that there is some strength here, but at the same time, Rare Breed is actually quite sippable, almost dangerously so. It is not like Elijah Craig Barrel Proof or Jack Daniel's Barrel Proof. I love Jack Daniel's Barrel Proof. I love Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, but they are hefty. They will assault that tongue. Rare Breed doesn't really do that. It's like it's got the proof, but it doesn't like demolish your palate when you sip it. Nice long finish. very nice, rich, creamy mouthfeel for the proof. Highly recommended.
Yeah, that's delicious.
It really is. I
Yeah,
love it.
anytime I've gotten a bottle, it doesn't last very long.
Yeah, Rare Breed is there was a period of time there where I was a little bit nervous because it was disappearing pretty quickly. But I think some of that is due to the glass shortages that are going on.
Oh, I thought you meant at your house.
That could happen too. Yeah, I was nervous for a little bit there, but I haven't had any trouble finding it lately, nor have I had any trouble finding Rare Breed Rye. In fact, Rare Breed Rye is becoming a lot easier to find. When it first came out a year ago, it was quite difficult. Now it's all over the place.
I haven't really seen it around here.
Oh, I had a buddy gift me a bottle, and it is like maybe this much. But maybe we'll do a tasting sometime. If you're nice.
It's not available greatly in North Carolina yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you can make it to South Carolina, I mean, I've seen it all over the place.
We could make it to South Carolina. We could get so many things.
Actually, y'all just stay there. We're good. We're good. No, seriously, though, you could cross the border and come get some Rare Breed Rye. It's excellent.
Yeah, it is. Go tomorrow.
Yeah, I got time. I'm not doing anything.
Well, you know what? I will make a little side note there. It's easier, though Wild Turkey makes less rye. There's a good bit of age difference between Rare Breed Rye and Rare Breed. So, you don't have to, like with Rare Breed, there's a 12-year element. With Rare Breed Rye, the highest element is 8 years. So, it doesn't take as long to produce the barrels needed to make Rare Breed Rye.
So the straight up, I hope I get the name right. The Russell's Reserve, not the single barrel, but the regular Russell Reserve, isn't the bourbon a 10 and the rye is a 6? Is that right?
Okay, so with Russell's Reserve, you have the two main expressions are the 6-year rye and the 10-year bourbon. Those are both 90 proof. Then you have the single barrel rye, which is 104 proof, and that is usually around 6 to 8 years. And then you have the single barrel bourbon, which is usually 8 to 10 years. Unfortunately, the single barrel bourbon on the standard bottling is not age stated, but a private selection now has the dates on the back. So you should be able to, using those dates, gather the maturation of it.
So when we're looking at, going from Jimmy to Eddie, and neither of them are done, but now we're kind of going in with Bruce.
Okay.
Bruce is more of the rye drinker.
Yeah.
From what he told us. Do we think that there's going to be even more rye products coming out, or what? How does the future
I think so.
look?
I think so. I think that people have gotten over the assumption that rye is a trend, because the old school distillers like Jimmy, like Booker, like the late Booker, the late Elmer, they kind of felt like, they came up at a time where rye was like, that was a northern thing. Rye was Maryland and Pennsylvania, it wasn't something for Kentucky. But times have changed, and consumers have embraced Kentucky rye. In fact, I sometimes wonder if people buy more Kentucky rye than they do other state ryes like Indiana. I know MGP is real big, but I mean Kentucky's cranking out some rye now. So it's growing, and with that, there's a demand there to keep producing more, which Wild Turkey is. And now that you have Bruce, who is an admitted fan of being, this, big fan of rye. Yeah, I think that you're going to see more rye expressions in Wild Turkey's catalog. You're going to see more rye production. Matter of fact, in the webinar that they had a couple weeks ago, they talked about rye production increasing. What I would like to see, and I've said this before, I've heard Bruce say this before, I would like to see Wild Turkey play with some new rye recipes, because, here's my logic. So Wild Turkey is known for having this one bourbon recipe. And I know people are like, yeah, they should do a wheated bourbon. They should try, like,
Well,
honestly, I just don't,
sorry.
I don't think so. I feel like Wild Turkey's bourbon is good the way it is. If you want to experiment and play around, whatever, that's fine. I'm game for tasting whatever. But to me, Wild Turkey bourbon being this one recipe, I mean, that's kind of like Wild Turkey. That's its thing. But the rye, Jimmy never really was a rye fan. I mean, they sourced rye, Wild Turkey sourced rye forever. I mean, through the 60s and 70s, they were sourcing from Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Illinois. Jimmy, they started distilling rye in the 70s, and they started putting it out in the 80s, very small amounts, each year. But it was never something that Jimmy doesn't like rye. I mean, that's just not his thing. So now that you got somebody on the team that loves it and the demand is out there, sure, I think you're going to see that rye portfolio grow. I think you might see a Long Branch rye, honestly.
Yep.
I don't
Any
think you're gonna get a
questions?
comment on that one.
I haven't seen any of the chat yet. And apologies to anybody watching. I have not, I've been trying to avoid it. But if there's anyone with any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I think you answered. Griff had a question about alternative mash bills, and you addressed that with just now by mentioning that they have one mash bill or recipe.
Well, one for bourbon, right? One for rye. And let's see. I don't really see any others, and if I missed some, I apologize. But there's a question here. Can you tell us more about the Rick House? Is it just a warehouse? Yeah, there's multiple. There's about 30 Rick Houses. I mean, they have a campus. They're at Tyrone, right there around the distillery. They have a campus in Camp Nelson, which is about an hour away, right by Camp Nelson National Cemetery. And then they have 3 Rick Houses right across the street from Four Roses, which they call McBrayer. And each of those campuses are different elevations, proximities to water like the Kentucky River, and produce their own unique flavor profiles. All Mother Nature. Most of them are traditional clad rick houses. There are a couple palletized rick houses, but those are typically used for the liqueurs, the RTDs that go to Australia, and are temporary holding of things like single barrels and this type of stuff. So your main barrels are aging in traditional wood-clad rick houses that are 6-7 stories high.
What's the special connection to Australia? Thinking back to like Master's Keep 1894,
yeah,
they seem to get some special releases there that aren't done anywhere else.
Yep. See, Australia. So if you were to kind of, and you can do a little basic search for this, but the biggest markets for Wild Turkey are America, Australia, and Japan. These are the areas where the grand majority of their product moves, and Australia is a huge Wild Turkey consumer. I don't know why that is. I've always wondered that too. Like, what was the connection there? Like, I don't know of any special, mission to Australia where they were going to convert people. I
think Jimmy Russell didn't travel there in the 70s or something to make friends or anything like that.
Oh, he traveled everywhere. Yeah. He went to Japan. I mean, Bruce has some hilarious stories about Jimmy at a sumo match in Japan. There are some great stories out. Booker the same way. I mean, I've heard some insane stories about Booker No. But anyway, yeah, I mean, they travel. I mean, they put in the time, but it just, for some reason, it stuck. You know what I mean? Like, what made it stick, And Australia is a huge wild turkey market. They love wild turkey. They even have their own core expression. So they don't, 101 is not their flagship in Australia. An 86 proof wild turkey is the core expression in in Australia. It has a similar label, but it's orange instead of red. Like the color areas are orange. And that's just for Australia. Like, you can't find that 86.8 proof anywhere else but Australia now. Used to go to some other countries, but it's an Australian thing now.
Is there any difference other than the label, or is there actually a difference in the flavor profile?
It's basically just watered down 101. Asked Eddie about it, and he said, it's just 101.
Well, you can get the same proof in other places, but is the profile any different in Australia compared to here?
No, I've taken it's just like if you were to take your 101 and dilute it down to 86.8, that's what the Australian, 86. So I mean, I take that back. I mean, to me, it tasted a little bit on the younger side when I had it, but Eddie swears to me that it's just watered down 101. So I think when I reviewed it, I kind of said it felt more like a proofed up 81 than a proofed down 101, if that makes any sense. But I think it really is more of they call it when they make it, they call it Wild Turkey Mixed Batch, which is like where they basically do a run of 101 and then they kind of have some of it go to 101, some of it go to 86.8 from what I understand. But and I could be completely wrong about that. That's just from what I've gathered over the years. But that 86.8 is unique to Australia now, and it is supposedly same age range or so as the 101. Same thing with the 81 proof Wild Turkey or just Wild Turkey bourbon. Somebody on here had a bottle of it earlier. They were showing. It's not quite as old as 101. It's more of the 6-year profile than the 6 to 8 year profile that you get with 101, but it's not far from it. From what I've gathered from Eddie, is like it's got a little bit more of the 6-year barrels in it, but it's not too far from 101 as far as what it's composed of. It's just bottled at 81 proof instead of 101 proof.
So I heard Eddie speak a number of years ago, shortly after, I guess a couple years after he'd gotten rid of the 80 and changed to 81.
Yeah, night and day.
And he was pretty adamant about like, this is something we had to do, as if it was like, to save the family honor.
Yeah, the 80, he'll tell you the 80 proof was 4 years and a day. I mean, and it was not something that Jimmy wanted. It was just something they had to do because everybody else had an 80 proof budget bourbon, and that's what Pernod wanted. So whenever when Campari purchased Wild Turkey, and one of his first priorities was basically to revisit that 80 proof because it was the weakest link in their portfolio as far as profile. He got rid of that and created the 81, which, like I said, is generally speaking, it's about the same as 101, just proof down, but it does have a little bit more of the 6-year barrels. And so, but when you're adding that much water, I mean, just think of something like Evan Williams Black Label. It works because it's the proof it's at, even if there are some younger barrels in there. It just kind of it mellows it out to that profile that it needs to be. It'll stand toe to toe with Jim Beam White Label any day.
Oh, come on now, that's a pretty low bar.
Well, I mean, I think that was the point though, because you see, like, Jim White moves.
Yeah.
I mean that.
Oh yeah.
So the 80 proof that Wild Turkey had could not compete with Jim Beam White Label. I mean, I'll tell you, the 80 proof Wild Turkey, well, some bottles are better than others, but some are not very good at all. And when they changed to that 81, they finally had a product that could, like, say, if you swapped out somebody's Jim Beam with 81 proof Wild Turkey, they'd either be really happy or not think anything really changed, because it's like it can stand toe to toe in that sense that if you're looking for that mixer type of low proof bourbon, that Wild Turkey 81 proof is right where it needs to be.
Excellent. Some good questions. Thank you, Isaac. Any other questions? I don't want to keep David all night.
Somebody asked if the mash bill of Rare Breed is the same as 101. Yeah, it's one bourbon mash bill for all the bourbons, which gives it kind of an interesting factor there. Like, in order to create new expressions, what can you do? Well, you can play with maturities, and have different age ranges for flavor. You can try different proofs. So you have lower proof bourbons and higher proof, and they're going to have slightly different profiles. You can have single barrels. We've seen all that. Long Branch introduced a new, thing to the mix where they have that mesquite charcoal that they're infusing into the bourbon to kind of give it. But what next? So if they wanted to expand their bourbon portfolio, not rye, but if they wanted to expand their bourbon portfolio, what are they going to do? So Master's Keep has kind of approached that with some finishes. Like, they have the Master's Keep one this year is a toasted oak barrel finish. They had Revival, which was a sherry finished bourbon. So, it makes you wonder what they're going to do to expand. So, are we going to see more finished whiskeys? Are we going to see maybe some runs of some lower barrel entry proofs, maybe going back to that 107 barrel entry proof? It'd be interesting to see if they decide to introduce a new bourbon mash bill. I don't think Eddie or Bruce are opposed to it. They're not as, zealous about hanging on to the old stuff like Jimmy is. And I kind of lean that way sometimes, but we'll just have to see. It'll be interesting.
Okay. Thank
got
you, David. Oh, sorry.
I got a quick thank you and 2 quick questions to follow up. I want to say thanks for your website and the deciphering of the laser codes that come with it. I was able to find and confirm the age of some Russell picks in upstate New York earlier this year. And I got a bunch of bottles of 2015 picks that have turned out to be absolutely fantastic.
Hell yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And really credit for that is due a Redditor, Yu Komori, who years ago sat down and decided he was going to decipher all these things. And he was the one that made all that happen. And I made sure on my blog to credit him for that.
Yeah.
But he did that through Kentucky Spirit, because Kentucky Spirit has the bottling date exactly on it.
Yep.
So once he learned how to compare that to the laser, he was able to crack it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then 2 quick questions. One is, what do you drink when you're not drinking something from Wild Turkey? And I haven't had the chance to read your book. I've known your blog, but not the book, and I look forward to getting a copy of it. But
cool.
What were some of the expressions of Wild Turkey that you might have not spoken the most highly of?
Okay. So Master's Keep 18. Well, I'll answer the second question first. Master's Keep 1894, which was an Australian exclusive. Yep. I was expecting so much more out of it because it had that Master's Keep name. It had the story about Rick House, and it was just like, oh, this is going to be everything. And then I tried it and I was just like, that's it. Like, that's all you're going to give me. So that one I had some harsh words about. A lot of it to do with how expensive it was, but the profile just really wasn't anything remarkable to me. The 80 proof Wild Turkeys we talked about that were ran mainly through the 2000s. They would run from pretty good to like drain pours. It was like they were so just inconsistent, and it was just well,
you probably didn't ruffle any feathers.
No,
because Jimmy would agree with you. It sounded like.
Yeah, he'd probably agree with me. Spiced. Oh my God, the monstrosity Wild Turkey spiced. What a horrible expression. It's awful. God, it was they were trying to compete with Captain Morgan. So they were trying to create a bourbon that could compete with a spiced rum. And oh my God, it works in eggnog. I mean, I'll give it that. But yeah, you can still find it. It's just, but Eddie told me that Australia loves spiced. They're like, oh man, they hated it when it was discontinued. So I'm starting to wonder about like, Australians like some pretty interesting stuff. So, anyway, but yeah, no, all the love in the world to Australia. But yeah, I guess it's just a different market. But yes, so those would be the top 3 off the top of my head that were just, what was the other question you had?
What do you drink when you're not drinking Wild Turkey?
Oh gosh, all kinds of stuff. I have another website called tweetdrams.com, which is where I basically review other whiskeys. I do it via Twitter, and so the blog acts more as like an archive, but I do the full review on Twitter as a thread. But it's got Scotch and Canadian whiskey and all kinds of different bourbons and ryes and Armagnac and cognac. So a lot of stuff. I mean, I'm into spirits, not really big into like tequila, mezcal, kind of dabble in rum a little bit. It's mostly whiskey. But I do like a good brandy, whether it's, Copper and Kings or, over here, or, if it's a cognac or Armagnac from France.
I've gotten a little bit into Armagnac myself and enjoyed that. But I think my question was more, what other bourbon do you drink when you don't drink Wild Turkey? Okay.
I love something from everybody. Like, there really is not, but I'm really digging on Starlight lately. I went and visited Starlight.
Finished or unfinished from them?
Both. I picked 3 barrels last month. I picked a straight bourbon. I did a VDN finished rye and a cigar batch bourbon, and which is a bourbon that's finished in Brazilian wood. But it's they've got great stuff. Love New Riff, love Wilderness Trail, and of course, I love Knob Creek and Maker's Mark, and I mean, I love Eagle Rare. I'm a big Eagle Rare fan. I know people like to boo and hiss about Buffalo Trace, but Eagle Rare is a favorite of mine. So a lot of different things. I mean, just behind me, you may be able to pick out some bottles. There's a lot of stuff behind me that's not Wild Turkey. There's a lot of stuff behind me that's not whiskey. So
yeah, I noticed that Bass Armagnac that you have up, and I don't speak French, so I probably screwed that up. But
no, hey, I'm with you on that. Yeah, I actually helped select a 25-year cognac earlier this year with Bourbon Pursuit and Mash and Drum and Take and John from Weekly Whiskey, and we had a good time picking that barrel, so or that cask I should say, and it's still available on Sealbox, which is strange, but it's still there. It's not cheap though, but it's uncolored, unfiltered, undosed, 25-year cognac. So anyway.
Okay.
Look for it now.
All righty.
If we have any more questions before we let Dave have his evening.
Yeah, well, I enjoyed this. This was very, very fun. It's always nice to interact with fellow enthusiasts and people that appreciate Wild Turkey from all walks of life, whether you're like super geeky nerdy with it, or whether you just like to sit back with a glass with some ice and pour some 81 or 101 or whatever in it. It's always a fun time,
Dave, but before I let you go, you said that the thing you're doing after the thing you're doing now is revisiting this book.
That's right.
What is the thing you're doing now?
Okay, so the thing I'm doing now is so this is the 5-year anniversary. This month is the 5-year anniversary of my blog. And I thought that it would be cool to do a retrospective of the last 5 years, because one thing I realized looking back at my earliest blog post where I'm at now, I started off trying to convince people to drink Wild Turkey. Like this is, learn from me, learn, this, you'll, it's not what you think, you know what I mean? Like, like learn like how I did, which was, I thought Wild Turkey was rot gut, and I was so wrong, so that's how I kind of start off as like, real excited about people jumping into the brand. And now, like, it seems like now, like the last couple reviews I've done for like real sought after stuff like Master's Keep or Russell's 13 is like, calm the hell down, everybody. Like, chill out. Stop paying $400 for these things. Stop paying $200 for single barrels with wax and glitter on them. This is silly, So it's like I go off trying to like champion like, let's do this. Go get into Wild Turkey. Now I'm like, stop it. So it's kind of funny, but so I've got this. It's all in. I try to be as positive as possible, but so it's 5 years worth of doing what I do. And then, so I pulled some of my favorite blog posts. I went through 300,000 words literally and found 50,000 words or so that I felt like kind of gave like a nice flow of what the blog was for the last 5 years. And then I also included within it like liner notes, like an album would have liner notes. So each post has some insight, like it might be as simple as where I was at when I was writing it, or what was going on around me, or it might be, me trying to like kind of approach it from a different angle. But anyway, each post has some liner notes, and I threw a Kickstarter up a couple months ago, and it was fully funded thanks to everybody. And so it's just moving forward, but everything is delayed. Like it's insane how everything's delayed. It like, it's just taking longer than I thought I would, but it would take, but whatever. It'll get done, I promise.
Well, that's something for us to look forward to.
It's called Wild Turkey Musings, by the way. Wild Turkey
Musings.
Yep.
Well, we'll all have to sip on some turkey while we're
enjoying
your musings.
Absolutely.
So huge thank you
Yeah,
to our
thank
guest.
y'all.
Very much.
Dave Jennings.
Hope I
Thank you
wasn't
so
too
much.
chatty. I get on a roll sometimes. So
This is called the Industry Insider Series. We appreciate kind of getting in the geekery and the weeds. So thank you for everything. And I can't recommend your book to folks enough. I really enjoyed it. And we're gonna
thank you.
kick this series up some more. I don't know who our next guest is, but we're going to try to make a monthly series going on
Cool.
because we had a really good time. We're not nearly as regular with you as you were with the blogs, but we really enjoyed getting to talk to folks that had a passion for spirits and like yourself. And
Well,
we're going to
thank you.
continue doing some more of it as we go. But for
Great.
tonight, David, thank you so much.
Thank you.
very
Cheers,
much.
y'all. Really enjoyed it.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.